Christian Texan and a proud military daughter, Tracy is deeply rooted in her community and is relentless in her pursuit of fully funded public schools for every child in Texas. She's also a board member of Grandparents for Public Education. So welcome, Tracy. Okay, our next capitalist is Zeph Capo. Zeph Capo is our second panelist, and he walks the walk. As a public school science teacher, a college trustee, a union leader, and a fierce advocate of educators across Texas. Zeph is the current president of Texas AFT, representing over 66,000 teachers and school staff across the state. He's led major fights for childhood education, career and technical training, and protecting public schools during the pandemic. Whether he's speaking true to power in the legislature, or organizing educators on the front lines, Zeph is a champion for public education and the community it serves. And he also lives here in Bastrop. So welcome, Zeph.
Great to be here.
Okay, so I'm also really proud to call both Zeph and Tracy my friends. It is, let me tell you, the education community who fights for public education across Texas. We are a small but mighty and growing community, and we are all friends because it takes all of us working together to make any difference that we could possibly do here in Texas. So, my first question is for Tracy. Tracy, you have been a school board trustee for over a decade. What was your first reaction when you saw SB2 and what it would do to our public schools?
Well, it's not the first time I've seen a voucher bill. There have been a lot of voucher bills in the past 30 years. It's more what I thought when it passed, which was very shocking. A lot of us went and testified against it. Grandparents was very active. We were very active in fighting against vouchers. What's interesting is it's probably the most nonpartisan issue in the state of Texas because 70 to 80% of Texans do not want vouchers. And here we are. It was Mr. Yes Man. And so that's the first thing I thought is $6 million will buy you a bunch of new state reps. And I was shocked that they were in rural counties because rural counties know their people better, I would think. I guess they're further away. That's one of the problems. But they usually know their people and those people are really strong. And anyway, so it was a thing and it was awful. And it's well, we're going to talk about it.
Absolutely. So, Zeph, I have a question for you. You taught in the classroom, you've led a union, you sat on college boards. How does this voucher, SB2, and the school funding bill at HB2 stack up when it comes to actually helping Texas students learn and succeed?
Well, let's start with the big picture comparisons and what they actually did. House Bill 2 ended up allocating $8.5 billion for roughly 5.5 million kids across the state of Texas. Where did that money come from? Well, first of all, you start off with $4 billion that were allocated 2 years ago and then held hostage because bipartisan members of the House chose to not support a voucher bill. 2 years later, that money has sat in the account and made probably $500,000 interest. And so when they get to this legislative session, they basically do what they had already agreed to do. After spending, we stopped counting at close to $90 million between what was directly given to the governor and what was sent in dark money by Jeff Yass, a person from Walmart, and one other billionaire from Illinois. All of that together is they're crowing. They're crowing about this historic amount and everything else and whatever, and like we'll take it and do what we need to do, but it's not it does not even come close. It barely makes up for the cuts they made in 2011. We are still, when you look at factoring out the numbers based on inflation, based on time, we are still behind the 8 ball from where we should be in per pupil funding. And we're still probably, when this all shakes out and we're compared to the rest of the states, the 8th largest economy in the world is still going to be somewhere in the bottom quartile when it comes to per pupil funding for public schools. flip that on its head and look at what they did, $1 billion this biennium for roughly 100,000 students that they say are supposed to be geared towards low-income students and students with special needs. But I think many of us in this room are astute enough to know what's going to happen with that is because they're going to set rules. They're going to put out applications. They're going to set deadlines. And those people that can get the deadlines, get through the hoops, do the things that need to be done, might be able to access this money if they need it. But when there's slots that don't meet the deadline, they're going to get opened up to everybody. So the folks that are working 2 or 3 jobs that haven't had time to pull everything together are now going to have the folks that have plenty of time filling out applications and taking those spots. So what we expect to see is this is going to be a tax break for those that already send their kids to public schools. And I think we will talk later maybe about how that directly impacts our rural schools in rural areas in a negative way.
Absolutely. So let's talk about how much money, Texas is currently planning on spending on a lot of these like voucher bills. So Texas plans to spend $1 billion on vouchers in the first 2 years, but projections show that it could balloon to $4.8 billion by 2030. So what happens to public schools as that money gets siphoned away year after year? Let's start with Tracy.
Yeah. That's a great question. What's going to happen? There's really only one pot of money for public schools, and it comes from our property taxes and whatever the state will give us. And it's certainly not enough, as Zeph was saying. It doesn't make up even for the inflation that's been since 2019. We haven't had a bump at all until, well, we'll talk about that other one probably a little bit. But it's gonna be a real problem for public schools. There's one pot of money, and what you're gonna see is that the projections. What you're gonna see is there will be more schools closing, and when schools close, they'll open back up perhaps into private schools who will pick them up for very little money and open up our schools and then teach kids in our own schools with more money per student than we even get in our own schools. So it's just a racket, it's a scam, and it's gonna hurt our kids because they don't require any kind of thing like a certification of a teacher. I mean, that's not a requirement. It's not a requirement in a charter school, it's not a requirement in a private school. And there will be no STAR tests. They will not rate them A through F, even though when you do rate your charters A through F, most of them perform worse than their local public schools. So it's going to be a big problem.
Yeah, it's in some ways will be death by 1,000 cuts. And when you look at, and there may be a question coming up, but when you look at, it doesn't take that many students. What they don't talk about with a lot of these tests, for an elementary school or a middle school, your difference between being a B school and an F school could be the matter of 2 or 3 students in a particular category, period. And then the voucher system is going to work the same way when it comes to funding. You don't need to lose a whole lot of people. You can lose a few kids. A kid from 2nd grade, a kid from 5th grade, and a kid from 3rd grade in one particular school could mean the loss of teachers, the loss of programs, the loss of pieces that are going there because the school still has to pay the light bill. The school still has to pay the bus routes. They've still got to take care of all the other things that they take care of without having the necessary increases for students. And the other thing that I would say is for particularly our rural schools and urban schools, because they have a lot of commonalities in the issues that they face with funding and program pieces and often being left out. You're not just facing the juggernaut of what suburban schools are able to move in their funding. You're now facing realistically 4 different systems that they're trying to fund. The homeschool system, which they actually ended up being allies against this voucher issue in many ways, because they did not want government interference in their particular schooling, and I can get that, but that is still a system that we're funding. The voucher system that's now in place that is going to layer on top of the already moves in privatization that were started with the charter school system. The charter school system and the voucher system are designed primarily to move public funding and public supports into private hands. Beyond just this piece, if you looked at all of the legislation that the state has passed, this voucher bill, the $1 billion, I believe it's $80 million will come off the top just to go to the vendor that's going to dole out all of these checks and do the paperwork. There are other places embedded just in Senate Bill 2 for vendors to make money off that. So that $1 billion is actually going to come down on what actually goes out to kids or get incorporated into it. The same issue is happening in charter schools right now. When we talk about, you look at the way that these bills are structured, look at the teacher finance bill. Like, it puts us in a tough spot because we've been advocating for rural teachers that have been at the lowest of salaries across our states and that they needed a bump. Do not believe for 1 second that most of what they did was about rural teachers or rural schools. What they did and why that factor was put in that way is really to give a boost to the private tier system, the charter school system. Because what you will have now are multiple teachers without certification, without degrees in charter schools in the middle of the urban areas, in the middle of the suburban areas that receive the highest salaries because they have under 5,000 student enrollment. They did not put factors on there. We asked for amendments to fix that particular issue because they already get so many gifts in the bills that are put in there. So that's really the problem that we're facing. We're all stuck in that same spot, that it's not about urban kids, rural kids, even suburban kids. It is about privatization. Everything that has been passed is full of vendor contracts.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to that little piece. You know, when recapture started 30 years ago, in 1994, so 31, whatever, when recapture started, it was supposed to be an equalization mechanism to give property wealthy districts the opportunity to pay a little more so that those that don't have the property wealth in a lot of rural areas could get more money. And you know, even in our suburb that I live in, we are okay with that. It's only fair. You can't help where you live and that you may or may not have property wealthy businesses or whatever. And we're fortunate we live by DFW, so we have a lot of property wealthy things, as Austin and some other places. But what's happened over the past 30 years with these charters is that Robin Hood recapture payments, that system, although you can't see it because they don't let you see it because it's not transparent, but it tracks those dollars that we get from recapture have supported the charter growth, the unchecked charter growth across the state. So we're getting hit, we've been hit, that's been our voucher program, the charters. And people just didn't realize it. And now we've got the vouchers. So it's like, this is so bad. But anyway, it affects all of us,
Okay,
one
so
charter.
I'm going to add something to that. So Zeph mentioned that there is a company that takes a cut of some of this voucher money. Can anyone guess who owns that company?
Musk.
Jeff Yaz.
Oh, yes.
The guy
Okay.
who donated to Greg Abbott
Yeah.
$12 million. I mean, it's crazy. That's why he wanted to give the money, because he's going to make several times as much at the end of the day when he's done with all his contracts. Anyway, you know, Tracy mentioned something that I'd like to pivot to just really quick, and it's not in my list of questions, so I apologize. But no, you mentioned something that I thought was really important when you talked, and I just think we should clarify. We were very close to seeing the end of STAR testing. We were, you know, the Democrats were like, if you're gonna, you know, why aren't you testing the private school kids? So if you want to equalize things, let's get rid of STAR testing. And at the very last minute, I mean, hours before the Texas Ledge ended, they couldn't pass it. They didn't get this done. And so STAR testing will continue for the next 2 years because they couldn't get it done. But we have to remember that, I mean, did we really think they were going to get it done? I don't know. But let's talk about what happened with that bill and why it came apart and like all the baloney that happened.
Yeah, it's baloney. I'm trying to think why it came apart. You may know better than I do why it came apart, but I do know that they were gonna replace it, the House wanted to replace it with 3 small tests throughout the year, through-year tests, which would seem that teachers could respond to that test because they'd be able to then see how their kids did and then adjust their curriculum and instruction to meet those needs. And they'd see who wasn't doing well. Little secret, teachers already know and do that. They just don't do it at the state's request for the state. They do it for their kids in their schools. So they know how these kids are doing all the time. The Senate didn't want that. They didn't want that through year. And of course, the through year would have been 3 separate tests. You know, they say they would have been norm referenced or whatever words Marath would use, but that's not true. It would have just been 3 more tests that teachers had to prep for. So I'm not sure that I feel so bad that it didn't pass because I didn't really want that. That'd be more vendors and more money.
And more testing.
More testing, you know. Yeah.
So that is the conundrum. I mean, there were a lot of people that supported going to the smaller snapshots so that there could be an adjustment. I'll be honest, a lot of our teachers wanted that change to happen. A lot of the other pieces that were really involved, though, were the differences between the House and the Senate. Were the Senate side, mostly at the beckoning of TEA, did not want any indicators other than the test in the accountability system. So there's other things that schools could do to show their value and show the things that they're doing that are outside of just the test. And those were going to be included in the House bill, and they did not come to agreement on that. I'm gonna go back to my theory. They will probably get it together. I think the biggest driving piece was when Nancy just said this about how do we turn this in. STAR is the biggest driver of vendor contracts in the state of Texas. It's a multi-million-dollar business year after year after year. And I don't think that the vendors that they are favored with were quite ready to adjust to what was needed if they were passing the law at this particular point. I suspect in 2 years when we come back and everybody's had a chance to figure out how they're gonna have all of their ducks in a row to turn in their new contracts and get everything done, you'll probably miraculously see everybody come to some type of agreement that starts us all over on this wagon wheel again of a new set of rules, a new set of tests, a new set of everything. Are we gonna pause accountability for another year? Because it is ultimately really about making money off our tax dollars.
Absolutely, and also not even just making money, I mean controlling some of these results from these tests and using them as political ammunition. I mean, they tend to do that a lot. So 155 out of 254 Texas counties have no accredited private schools. So what does a voucher mean to a county that has no alternative, no private schools?
It means that they will lose money without doing anything. And their schools will be defunded, and they won't have a choice. And actually, the governor labeled this school choice. It's not school choice. It's the school's choice. It's not the parent choice. And so the rural districts will be left behind unless, what could happen, they're not going to spend a lot of money, but if you've got some little buildings that aren't occupied right now in a rural